Magandang umaga, magandang tanghali, magandang hapon at magandang gabi sa inyong lahat. A very pleasant day to everyone watching and listening to us all over the world and especially here in our country. This is your hour and I am Rita Gadi. Yung pagbati po natin sa ating Tagalog ay sakop na yung bawat panahon ng isang araw. Ngunit sabi nga, mas magandang sabihin na maganda. Because in English, we just say good morning, good afternoon, etc. But there is a certain smile that goes with maganda. It's a beautiful morning, it's a beautiful afternoon, it's a beautiful evening. And so too with the title of our program, Higit sa lahat ang tao. If we try to translate it in English, higit sa lahat, more than anything in the world, more than everything, it is the person. So what does it mean, the person? It means, my phone is ringing somewhere. So it means ang tao. You see, in Tagalog, we don't distinguish the gender when you say ang tao. Pwedeng babae, pwedeng lalaki, bata, matanda, ang tao. It is the human being. So more than everything, more than anything in the world or more than everything else, it is the tao, it is the person, it is the human being. Pero mas maganda pakinggan sa ating Tagalog pag sinabing higit sa lahat ang tao. And I am borrowing that from the rallying cry actually of the Ministry of Human Settlements, which was headed by Imelda Romualdez Marcos during their time some 45, 50 years ago, when she was appointed as the Minister of Human Settlements, and she thought of what it meant to create a human settlement. She thought of 11 basic needs, 11 basic services that a human settlement needs. And the center of all of this, water, power, food, clothing, shelter, livelihood, education, health services, nutrition, justice, mobility, recreation, and sports, all of these 11 basic services are to be given in a human settlement because higit sa lahat, ang tao ang kailangan makinabang. That was her idea of how a human settlement ought to be created and how it can be sustained and how it ought to survive. That is the title of our program now because together with my colleagues in the Katipunan ng Demokratikong Pilipino, over the past year, more than a year actually, you have Sir Butch Valdez, you have RJ Javellana, you have Professor Casino, all of them talking about the oligarchy control of our water, of our energy, of our transportation, and several other things. Practically, the 11 basic needs of a human settlement, water, power, food, clothing, shelter. Sino ang may hawak, sino ang may control? Yes, you could say government should be taking care of all of this. Yes, we have provisions, not only in the Constitution, but so many hundreds, thousands of laws which ought to be zeroing in on the importance of the human being, of the person. Ngunit madalas nakakalimutan ang tao. Ang dami-daming mga burloloy na nakakabit sa mga batas, sa mga kinakailangan gawin, sa mga provisions, lahat ng yan. Ngunit, paano ba talaga diretso ang makakatulong sa tao? And as I was saying, our Katipunan ng Demokratikong Pilipino has been on a crusade regarding the transference of basic services. And hindi na pinili lahat ng services. Pinili lang nila sapagkat ito ang mga mahalaga, hindi lang noon, ngunit sa kasalukuyan at para sa kinabukasan. Water, energy, mobility, and of course, consequently, it goes with livelihood, etc. and all. But let's concentrate on what they have been talking about first as far as water is concerned. Ano ba ang kinakailangan na malaman natin at bakit natin pinaglalaban dito sa ating Katipunan ng Demokratikong Pilipino, the KDP, that they have been rallying and coming out with all the complaints. Si RJ nasa sa mga opisina na at naglabas na ng mga complaint laban nga sa mga humahawak nitong basic service na ito na patubig, water. Water is, I've said this so many times in the past. Water is like air and land. It should not be owned. Hindi naman sa atin yan eh. It was God-given. It was already there. It is not a product of our industry or we did not work for it. It is there. Water is there. Water is part of part of the planet Earth. Water, land, and air. Yan, mga basic elements yan that comprise our planet. And yet, in time, of course, what has happened is, well, there have been divisions in land. There are demarcation lines that they segregate one country from the other. Lahat yan nag-shift, geography, etc. and all of this. And then now you have also the control of the air. Meron airspace. What is the airspace above a country? Hihingi ka ng permiso para makadaan ka and so forth. And of course, air is also something which is so important in our life. We have to, and air is connected to what we breathe, which is oxygen. Oxygen comes from the forest. They say that we need 10 trees for our lungs per person. You need 10, kailangan ng 10 puno para ang isang tao ay makahinga. We need the exhaust of 10 trees in order to have enough oxygen for us to be able to breathe. And what is being controlled as far as the trees and the forests are concerned? Papasok na naman dyan yung mga nagpuputol ng mga puno para mahirapan din tayo ng ating oxygen. And then you also have toxic waste coming from vehicles and coming from factories and coming from other industries and all of this uncontrolled toxic waste. And then you have natural calamities, of course, a natural disaster of the eruption of a volcano, but that lasts only for about a week or so. And then you have the puncturing of our ozone layer. But that is already as far as the air that we breathe is concerned. And then the land, of course. Land now is to be titled. It has to be owned. You have real estate. You have demarcation lines as far as countries are concerned. Some countries are contiguous. So, sometimes, not sometimes, but there are incidents in Europe, for instance, where you have a house that is located between Italy and Switzerland, for instance, like somewhere in the Alpine mountain, in the Alps. You have some communities that nestle between two countries. So there you also have the division of territory as far as countries are concerned, and that is where wars are also being waged. You have, for instance, North and South Korea, where they had to have a 38 parallel, which divides the two countries. One race being divided because of wars. Then, of course, you have the conflict that you have between India and China. Actually, it's just one highway up there in the mountains, and they're fighting over that one piece of road as to belonging to India or belonging to China, and that's where the conflict goes. But let's get back to what our KDP has been fighting for, and that is water, energy, and mobility, and transport, telecommunications also, which is part of the control. But what are we talking about as far as these basic services are concerned? Well, the KDP has always said that water and energy and transport basic services should now be transferred back to the government. It was controlled by the government before. 35 years ago, that was what it was, like water. Let's talk about water before the coming of the administration of Mrs. Aquino. Water was NAWASA, di ba? Yan ang tawag natin, NWSS NAWASA. Ang may hawak niyan ay ang pamahalaan. At ang pakinabang niyan ay bumabalik sa taong bayan. So you have water distribution, you have water sources, and all of this, and you have all of the necessary work that ought to be done by the NAWASA or the water system, and that is sewage, also the canals that will have to be cleaned, and the filtering of the water that's coming from our water resources, and um, several other administrative work that has to be done as far as water is concerned. Water for every household, potable water, water for industries and factories and manufacturing, water also for irrigation. So you have this water system that will provide all of that for all the basic needs of a community and of the people. Higit sa lahat ang tao. So the water that we are talking about as far as the KDP is concerned is precisely that. The water system that has now been, I don't know, they call it turned over to what we all call as the oligarchy. Oligarchic control of our water system. Anong ibig sabihin ng oligarch? Let me go back to the root word of oligarchy. And oligarchy comes from the Greek word oligarchia. What does it mean? It is the despotic power exercised by a privileged group. The despotic power exercised by a privileged group. Sa makatuwid, sa kasalukuyan, ang ating water system na sinasabi nga ng KDP na hawak ng oligarko, ito ang nangyayari. We have the exercise of the old imperial powers of the time of the kings and they were controlling the community in such a way, and water now is controlled by the oligarchy. Na-transfer na from the government, and the government is for the people, of the people, and by the people. Hindi na taong bayan ang may-ari, ang nakikinabang at nagkakaroon ng administration and management para sa patubig. Hawak na ito ng oligarchy. Who are these oligarchs? These are the a group that is actually controlling. And this is the economic concentration of a few. That is the oligarchy that controls our water system now, today. So that is what our organization, our political organization, the Katipunan ng Demokratikong Pilipino, they have been fighting for this. And we have, Sir Butch Valdez and Toti Casino and RJ Vallana. You could watch them on KDP almost every day. They're talking about this. Because if you go over what has happened to the transfer of this basic service to the oligarchy, you would see that there are so many items there that are not being provided for and over which they are making money from. We are not against people, or at least the KDP is not against businessmen who would want to make money, but they should not make money at the expense of the people. Higit sa lahat, kailangan ang tao ang makikinabang, because this is a basic service, a basic need. That is water. What was it like that we have water now the way it is being distributed and managed today? Well, from the time of President Marcos in 1966, when he was first elected as President of the Republic, until the time that he left the Philippines in 1986 through the maneuverings of the State Department of America, we have had something like 20 hydroelectric power and dams that were constructed from 1967, almost every other year. You have the Angat Hydro Dam, Pantabangan, you had the Leyte there, Makiling, Agus Hydro 2, Tiwi, Masiway, can hardly read my handwriting, Cebu, Kalayaan Hydro, Agus 7 Hydro, Batasan, and then you have the Bataan Nuclear. Of course, this is another source of energy. Main Magat Hydro, Palimpinon, Kalaka, Magat, again, Magat A, Magat B, Agro 4, Agro 5, and Kalalang Hydro. Well, this is the listing that I was able to get as far as those 20 sources of water. As I've said, the sources of water are used for hydroelectric power, and that is a source of energy. They're used for irrigation, which waters our fields, and that is used also for the potable water after it passes through the filtering, and that's what process is done for this water to be potable, and this goes into every household. So here we have, for instance, in the metropolis and perhaps in other parts of the country, you have the control of the water system, not by government and not for the people or of the people or by the people, but you have the water being managed and administered by the oligarchs. This is what I said earlier with defining the power of those corporations that control this basic service. Why has this happened? Well, 1986, that was how it happened. They started this by several memoranda of agreement, several contracts, several other whatever it is that they were signing between private individuals, private corporations, this corporations, the oligarchic corporations, so that they can take over the management, the administration, the distribution, and the ownership, perhaps in many ways, of our water system. That's exactly what we were saying. Nakalimutan na higit sa lahat ang tao ang kailangan makinabang. That is water. And then another advocacy that our group, the KDP, has been fighting for is precisely the power, energy. I mentioned all of these dams and hydroelectric and all of this, but I will just want to read the energy that was the energy program we had 50 years ago, which was already set and has been continuing. And despite the oil crisis that we experienced, because ang energy natin nanggagaling pa sa mga import natin ng oil. So we had here the energy crisis in 1973. But prior to that, we already had a lot of this, several of these hydroelectric power plants that were already constructed from 1967, as a matter of fact, the first year of President Marcos' administration. So nagkaroon ng energy crisis, nagkaroon tayo ng oil crisis. Nakita natin yan sa Amerika, lumilinya pa para sa gasolina and all. And prior to that, as I've said, we already had enough of other sources of energy, but we still needed the sources of energy coming from what we are importing, the energy coming from the oil, to be able to make our machines and factories run. So because of this, President Marcos instituted a self-reliant program for alternative sources of energy. And so what he did was to be able to reduce our dependence on petroleum, which is imported. He started with all of these dams and hydroelectric power, as I was mentioning. And then, of course, the geothermal energy, which is, as ang tawag nga dito, yung energy that is underneath where you had volcanoes. This is the steam and the power that's coming from underground. Thermal, geothermal, that's the steam, nakabaon na energy, which was already which already was done as the alternative sources of energy during the time of President Marcos. In fact, yung sa Maricaban, and then of course sa Ormoc, sa Leyte, you had the geothermal there, and that was supplying enough energy not only for the island, for the two islands, but what was needed only for the grid extensions to be able to extend the power of these geothermal plants. And it has reached a point when we were already ranking second to America as far as the source of geothermal is concerned. I remember one time when we were a delegation which Mrs. Marcos brought to the United States to look at the geothermal plants there in America, and it was President Nixon who was mentioning and really was so much amazed that our production, our source of geothermal ranked only second to the United States at that time. Can you imagine what it could be now? Anong ginawa nila? They took over. Mrs. Aquino gave it to her brother or brother-in-law, and then her brother-in-law could not manage it and then sold it, and now it is being held again by an oligarchic group. Our geothermal is held again by the oligarchs. Ang lungkot, hindi ba? And that's exactly what the KDP has been fighting for. These are the alternative sources of energy. As a matter of fact, when Mrs. Marcos attended in Nairobi, Kenya, when there was this international conference on non-conventional sources of energy, ang yabang natin doon when we were telling all the delegation, I think Prime Minister Indira Gandhi was there. That was the opportunity I had to even interview her. And she was amazed at the fact that we had the second largest source of geothermal energy at that time in the 1970s. Can you imagine that? Ano nangyari? kinuha na naman, binigay sa oligarchs, which is now being controlled by the oligarchs. Oh my goodness. Basic alternative source of energy. And then we had several other institutions. We had, the petroleum. Petron was owned by the government at the time, and then you had the subsidy coming from the oil reserves and the whatever was being earned from this, so that could be the reserve that would help cushion just in case the world, the global per barrel cost of petrol would be rising up, and it would be difficult for the people to afford because of this fluctuation. And it was there that you had the government helping out, subsidizing in part, so that it would the increases in the control of petroleum petroleum prices would not be so difficult and so unbearable for the common people who are using this. So ano nangyari? Pinrivatize din. It was again given to the private sector, and the private sector are the oligarchs. They're the ones who can set up all of the machinery that they need to be able to control this. And this happened when 35 years ago. And that's exactly what the KDP has been fighting for. Plus the fact that President Marcos already saw that we should not be totally dependent on petroleum, and that other sources of energy is important. And that is when we had the Bataan nuclear power plant. A nuclear power plant that would have been able, if it is already fully operational, to reduce our electric bill consumption by 50%. I think Sir Butch Valdez has been doing the calculations for this and mentioning this over and over again every time they go on air. Why is it that up to now we are not operating the nuclear plant, which would help reduce our energy costs for the private and the factories and the industries by 50%? Why so? President Duterte, in the beginning of his administration, said so, that he will be able to have the nuclear plant operational. Prior to President Duterte, during the time of Noynoy Aquino, already we had Congressman Martin Romualdez and several others, and even Congressman Cojuangco, also mentioning that the preparations for the operation of the nuclear plant would be underway if already the president would grant this. Pero walang nangyari. Then President Duterte came into power, and that's exactly what he said. And then he got an energy secretary, Discusi, who is now involved in politicizing in the KDP, in organizing, I don't know, candidates for 2022, but he is the Secretary of Energy. And in the beginning of this administration, he himself said so, that the Bataan nuclear plant will already be operational because that was the instruction of the president. But now it is what? We only have about 600, 700 days before the end of this administration. And Kusi is not moving on this at all. You see how important it is that this other source of energy would already be made operational, so that the energy cost of every household, of our factories, of our industries, and all the other manufacturing organizations that we have will already be dependent on the energy that's coming from the nuclear plant, and that would be less costly than all of this imported petroleum that we have. So that is how sad it is. Biogas, biomass, we also had it, hydroelectric, etc. And all of this have already been set. Some of them have already been operational. But as I've said, sayang, kasi ang dami pang nakalista. There are still about 15 other dams that should have already been constructed over the past 35 years to help supply the hydroelectric energy that we need and to lessen our dependence on petroleum. That is energy. And I think when you listen carefully and regularly to the other broadcasts of KDP, where you have Sir Butch, Sir R.J. Javellana, and Professor Toti Casino talk about this, then you would know that energy is so important, and it is under, again, the control of the oligarchy. Let me repeat that. This is the group, according to the definition from the Greek times, actually, this is the control of the growth of a community by the economic concentration in the few. Ilan lang yan. Now, let me discuss, not discuss, but let me read to you who are the few. This is from former Chief Justice Reynato Puno, who was tasked by the president to be the head of a committee that would write a new constitution, and to gather together several academicians, lawyers, and people from all sectors of our life, of our community, of our nation, of our country. They got together to be able to write a new constitution. But the basic line there is, of what benefit will this constitution be for the people? And of course, when you speak about benefit to the people, it goes again to the basic services that I'm talking about: water, power, food, clothing, shelter, and all of this, etc. But the baseline there is the economics of it all, so that livelihood is so important, and of course, the benefit that directly will be given to the people. Going back to our program title, Higit sa lahat ang tao. Ang kailangan makinabang. Kung magsusulat sila ng bagong saligang batas, kailangan ang tao, higit sa lahat, ang makikinabang. Well, this is what he said at the beginning of their discussions and their meetings, and this is what he came up with, and I'll read it. The Philippine economy is served by 36 commercial banks, but only 4 families control more than 60% of the 7 trillion resources of the entire commercial banking industry. Will I repeat this? Yes. Only 4 families control more than 60% of the 7 trillion resources of the entire commercial banking industry. Only 10 families own 60% of the 10 trillion combined capitalization of some 300 business companies in the country. I will repeat that line again. Only 10 families own 60% of the 10 trillion combined capitalization of some 300 business companies in the country. Such a business environment fosters a state of despotism, exactly the definition of oligarchy, that aims to preserve the monopoly of the few, and thus following a theory of the government of the few, by the few, and for the few. This is a direct quote of former Supreme Court Chief Justice Reynato Puno. And that explains exactly what I've been trying to say, and what the KDP has elaborated time and time again on a daily basis, 3 times a day. As often as you eat your breakfast, lunch, and dinner, they have been crying out that we are under this oligarchic rule of a few families, a few corporations that are despotically controlling the basic services that really ought to go to the people. Remember the title of this program, Higit sa lahat ang tao. Ngunit lahat ng itong mga serbisyong ito at mga pangangailangan, basic na pangangailangan ng mga tao, ay hindi nabibigay sapagkat kontrolado nga nitong tinatawag na oligarko, businessmen. Again, we repeat, there is nothing wrong with businessmen getting very, very, very rich and being posted as the first 100 in the Forbes list of multi-millionaires. There's nothing wrong with that. But what is wrong is if they make money at the expense of the Filipino people. Because the basic services are supposed to be for the benefit of the people and not for the benefit of their pockets. They can get into other businesses, other investments. They could go into agricultural production. They could go into the processing of minerals so that we can have enough steel, into all of those items that we need on a day-to-day basis. Yes, and food production especially. And many other businesses that they could think of with the creativity of their geniuses for investments and businesses, but not at the expense of the Filipino people when it comes to the basic needs and the basic services of a human family, of an individual. And I'd like to read again how this oligarchic control comes to dominate even our justice system. Sad, isn't it? Perhaps at some other time I will elaborate how, precisely because of this oligarchic control, even our justice system suffers. Meaning, if you have very little money, you'll get very little justice. If you have plenty of money, you'll get plenty of justice and even go scot-free. Perhaps not the justice that we know to give everyone his due, but the justice that they think is due them anyway. So, ang sabi nga dito, I'm quoting from a book of Jerry Spence when he speaks about this conglomerate. We speak about this not only here in our country, but throughout the world, the oligarchic conglomerate of those who control the flow of money of the world, IMF, World Bank, and all of these trilaterals, and well, all of these Soros, Rothschilds, Rockefellers, etc., all of them that control the flow of money in the world. And that is this new oligarchic amorphous agglomeration of corporations, of banks and insurance companies, and these mammoth multinational financial institutions. And they are maintaining, with their kind of prurient passion, the money and the demands of the justice system, or it's of its own alone for itself. And so that is why it controls just about, well, predictably everything else should fit into their kind of system. And that is all interpreted in pesos and in dollars. So if you have plenty of dollars, plenty of pesos, you get the kind of justice that they deserve. And that's exactly the sad part about it. So you have this new oligarchy that do not deal with the individual. They do not deal with the human soul. They do not deal with human justice, because the profit from the people is their lifeblood, and that is their business. And so since there is no profit in justice, people are not likely to receive justice. And so it goes that, we too are moving into this oligarchic control, and we become similar to many of their behavior in a way, because, in the corporate world, people have become corporate like these oligarchs, because now the people's hearts are synchronized with the corporate heart. Kung anong sinabi ng mga oligarchs at kung anong ginagawa na, yan na. Parang that's it. It's controlled already. We are like slaves to it. Because our leaders are often, this is something really, our leaders are often elected because of their purchasable images on television and now in social networking. And then you have perhaps even eternal salvation is also something that is sold in the marketplace. This is the corporate oligarchy that controls just about not just water, power, shelter, food, clothing, and all of this, the basic services and basic needs. But then, as we've said, kailangan bumalik sa ating sinasabing higit sa lahat ang tao. So let us consider how important that is, as far as what the KDP has been fighting for when it speaks of water and power, water and energy, and then, of course, transport, for instance, and mobility. There was a time when LRT was owned and controlled by the government. Now it has been transferred again to the private sector. That's why over the past 35 years, nagkaroon ng sangkatutak na aberya and all of this. And then, of course, several other programs which are being transferred for the basic services for the people, which are actually being taken care of by the oligarchy. So here it is that we really have to find out whether we have a government that can take into consideration this specific act of controlling basic services for the people. I think President Duterte is open to this. He just needs perhaps a little more time, Mr. President, so that in the remaining 700 days of your administration, or until the elections of 2022, we can see the light as far as these basic services are concerned. And you will consider what you yourself have said in the beginning of your administration, that the government will take over water and power and mobility. And of course, we speak of telecommunication, but that's another matter altogether. That's the new technology, and you know how it is. medyo masalimuot pa yon, and I have other experts in our KDP that can discuss this further. But then again, as we've said, how important is it that we consider the human being as the center of all improvement, growth, investments, and all of these basic services that ought to be given to them? So, there is now the need, for instance, to have a better program for vaccination. Higit sa lahat ang tao ang titingnan. It is no longer all of this cornucopia of statistics that we have, how many hundred thousands, millions of vaccines are arriving, etc. We need a program here of how the priorities have already been taken care of, will be taken care of at the specific timeline, and then the rest of the population. And then, of course, a lot of other concerns, of other basic needs that should be attended to by ourselves now, if we can do this by ourselves, because this is where the importance of higit sa lahat ang tao. I keep on going back to this because, for instance, sinasabi nga ngayon, tumataas ang kaso ng COVID-19 kasi nga people are crowded, or they're all together in one place, or when they're eating. But have you really seen what it means to be in a congested area, or in a 45 by 45 square meter place, or even smaller than that, and you have a whole family that lives there with several children, grandparents, uncles, aunties, and other extended family members? Kahit na siguro magdikit-dikit sila, halos hindi na nga magkasya. And how so it is that they will be eating all together. Maybe one or two of them will go out to buy food and then come back and be contaminated with the virus, and the rest of the household is contaminated. Wasn't there a program that Senator Go proposed of bringing some people from the congested areas to the provinces so that they can have more open space, and that there could be a better means of livelihood for them, and better housing? So what happened to this? That is also part of containing the congestion of our communities. And then, wasn't there a program that will be teaching our children to be able to do some crafts and some trade also as part of a livelihood program? Ang dami kasing kailangan na isasagawa na hindi nagagawa sapagkat nakakalimutan, higit sa lahat ang tao. We go back to that time, oh my goodness, 50 years ago, 45 years ago, when the human settlement of Mrs. Marcos had all of these basic services attended to. You had, for instance, we had hospitals and healthcare centers, and then you had the tertiary hospitals. Up to this day, hindi pa na-replicate yan. How many provincial hospitals can be able to have the facilities as a tertiary hospitals? Wala. We still have it all here in Manila. What happened over the past 35 years na hindi ito naisagawa? You see how it is that we keep going back and forth? No, we keep on going back so that we can learn from that particular past into the programs that we ought to have done already over the past 35 years. And so we speak now, for instance, of the learning process, and how this distance learning, and how our children with all their laptops and podcasts and whatever you call it are having difficulty even. Do you know how even the mere instructions for registering for the vaccine, for instance, sa cellphone lang, kasi wala silang laptop, wala sila ng personal computer, karamihan wala ng mga, they don't have those instruments. Can you imagine children learning from this almost as big as the palm of your hand, trying to look at their lectures and the lessons there, and trying to listen to the teacher in their mobile phones? How difficult this has been. So there you could see how even our private individuals, these big corporations, the oligarchy, why don't you try to extend investments in such a manner to be able to help the greater number of community? Anyway, so I'm talking beyond myself perhaps regarding this, but at this particular stage, going back to what it was possibly done before and sustained and was effective and successful, then perhaps at this time it is not too late to be able to look for the possibilities of gearing up towards that particular era, that we already had this successful environment in a human settlement, to be able to extend it now at this particular time. Because we are so engrossed with all the government notifications and instructions on the pandemic and the vaccines, when there are so many other things that ought to be taken care of. For instance, we are going to celebrate, as the Holy Father has taken cognizance of this in the Mass last Sunday, the 500 years of our Christianization. And his homily was saying how blessed we are that Catholicism was brought to our country 500 years ago. And now the debate again over the first Mass was celebrated when Magellan landed today, March 16, 1521. And the first Mass was celebrated. Of course, we will not go into the fight he had with Lapu-Lapu, but Catholicism, because Christianity expands to many other denominations, but this is Catholicism, where you had the friars that came with the galleons of Magellan, Victoria. What are the names of these galleons that came with him? Three of them. I think one ship already was shipwrecked, but then he landed anyway in one of the islands here in Mactan, and that was it. Catholicism was brought to our country. Indeed, we commemorate that day. But what happened the 300 years of Spanish dominion over our country? It is not exactly 500, it is 500 years of Catholicism, but 300 years of Spanish domination by the friars themselves, who were preaching the gospel and also preaching their progeny. So you had sons and daughters coming out of these bishoprics and the parishes, and you have even the right of the first night, which is well, we had the revolution precisely because of the abuses of the friars. Should we not have asked them, this denomination, to ask for forgiveness to the Filipino people for what has been done as far as their spreading of the Catholic faith was concerned, when it brought about a Philippine Revolution and the novels of Jose Rizal, actually his writings, against the friars of that time. And this is a sad commentary then, as it continues to this day, when we ask, for instance, where is the clergy? Where are the priests? Where are the missionaries? Living in palaces, that's what you call it. The cardinal's palace, the bishop's palace. And that is exactly what our own Pope today has been said, that there is too much of the profligacy even of the hierarchy of the church, when there is so much that ought to be done. Precisely now that we have this disease and this pandemic, it is not just a matter of flashing regularly prayer for healing, calling to God, etc., but in action, what is being done to be able to talk to the people again through social networking and telling them what is there that ought to be done for the care of your soul. Why is it that the drug war, the anti-illegal drug war of President Duterte is not partnering with the church, when drug addiction is the care of the soul? Psychologists have now come to that conclusion a long time ago, that addiction is coming from the lack of soul. They have told their souls or their consciences to sit in a corner and have forgotten it there. And where is it who is it that could bring them back for the realization? Higit sa lahat ang tao. And a human being is composed of body, mind, and spirit. Your body to be taken care of by your proper nutrition, the food that you eat, etc. Your mind to be taken care of by the education that is open for you to avail of. But your soul, that spiritual being that will last forever, that was already there in the mind of God from the beginning, if there was a beginning of time, timeless, a spirit in you, living, that is why you are alive. And so who is to take care of the soul? You are to take care of it, and then you have the assistance of the ministers of our church, the Catholic Church, precisely. The 500 years we are commemorating now. Oh my goodness. Am I preaching? Yes, I am preaching. Because then that is what we have forgotten in our lives. Higit sa lahat ang tao, at ang tao ay may kaluluwa. Precisely. That is why you have proliferation of crime. You have addiction for illegal drugs. You have all of this greed for more and more. The greed for power, the greed for money. Where is it coming from? From the defect of a soul. So when you see, like for instance, those of you who have gone through annulment, and now that it is allowed by the church from cases that involve psychological incapacity, do you know what that means precisely? That means that there is an element in your soul which is defective. Psychological incapacity. Psycho is your soul. Lojo is the study of your soul. And the incapacity means that your soul has a defect. Kaya nga sinasabi, pwedeng maghiwalay. It is allowed by the church sapagkat sa kaluluwa may defecto na. But should we just let it be? When all of these things we're discussing today really affect every individual. Balikan natin yung sinasabi nga ni Mrs. Marcos, higit sa lahat ang tao, body, mind, and spirit, which we have to take care of. And that's precisely what we're trying to emphasize in this program. Other than linking it with the basic needs and services that every individual is in need of, and which the oligarchy or just a few should not control, because that is now the control of our society. Sabi nga ni Chief Justice Renato Puno, a government by the few, for the few, and of the few. Magkaka-eleksyon 700 days from now. Ayun ang mangyayari. Sa ngayon, yan ang pinag-uusapan. Qualifications of candidates, my goodness. Qualification of a human being is more important. Tao muna ang tingnan natin. Not all the, what do you call this, the decorations on the Christmas tree of a person. You know, all of this, whether he's very rich, very popular, and you know him from television and all of this. Oh my goodness. Higit sa lahat ang tao, indeed. So here we are and talking about all of the things that are coming to us at this particular stage. We also have, I've already spoke about congestion and the idea of Senator Go, who is being mentioned as possibly a candidate for the presidency. Ano na nangyari sa decongestion? Because that is precisely the problem now with the contamination, which is so rampant and which is so, it's going berserk. It's going ballistic, as a matter of fact, contaminating members of the family, families and families. And what is that? Kasi congested. Walang magawa talaga na pwedeng, there is not enough space really to move. There's not enough space in the home. There's also not enough breathing space outside. Kaya tama yung sinasabi ng mga ibang mayor. We should have enough safe spaces outside. Safe meaning malawak na mga lugar, parang sa Luneta, kahit na may social distancing, meron din, at least you can have fresh air and all of this na pwedeng pasyalan. Safe spaces, because really, if you have entered into any of these slum areas, you would cry to see how congested they are and how difficult it is for them to be all together in just one space. Kaya kailangan talagang lumabas, maupo sa bangketa, maglaro ang mga bata sa kalsada, because inside the house, there just isn't enough space. So what do we do about this? Nakalimutan na natin, higit sa lahat ang tao. I keep on repeating this kasi once upon a time, 35, 50 years ago, during the time of President Ferdinand Marcos and Imelda Marcos, they looked into this precisely. Yun ang sentro ng lahat ng development programs nila. And to go back to the oligarchy that is now controlling our basic services, we could say, for instance, that during their time, there was not one of their friends that controlled any of these basic services. It was all controlled by the government. Ang tao ang may hawak nito. Walang sa kanilang mga kaibigan. Tinatawag na cronies, nakinabang. Nakinabang sila sa negosyo nila na kanilang tinayo. Doon sila nakinabang sa kanilang kita privately. But from the people, name me one who has been able to control what? To control water, energy, and all of this? Anyway, so that is a once upon a time, which I keep going back to because it has been done. It was possible that it was successfully given to the people. Why is it that we have forgotten all of that? Nagkaroon talaga ng pag-aangkin, greed came in. As soon as Mrs. Aquino sat into power, that's exactly what happened. Greed for all the positions in government. Tinanggal niya lahat ng elected positions, sa Supreme Court, sa judiciary, lahat yan. Anybody suspected, even in the government bureaucracy. Can you imagine? Sa Bureau of Customs, tinanggal niya lahat. All the civil service eligibles, tinanggal lahat. Anything that was of the administration of President Marcos. What is that? Greed for power. If you would look and try to analyze and do a profile of the politicians today and what they were before, there was one, for instance, who was, I know this, I will not mention his name, but he was part of the FLAG, yung mga free legal assistance, and they had an office in Intramuros. And I would see him quite often. Pagka tumitigil yung jeep sa harapan ng Sambeda, we were students in the College of Law. Pag tumitigil yung jeep nila sa harap ng Sambeda, and nakasabit siya sa, as they say, sa stribo, what do you call it? Nakasabit sa jeep papunta ng Intramuros, and he knows that we're students of law. Sumisigaw pa siya, pagbutihan yung pag-aaral ninyo. Nagka-jeep lang siya. Nung pumasok si Mrs. Aquino, inappoint siya. OIC, tinanggal yung mayor ng isang malaking city dito. Anak na niya ngayon ang mayor doon. Tinanggal yung mayor doon at siya ang inilagay. Look at his profile then and his profile now. Multi-millionaire today in 35 years. Oh my goodness, oligarch na rin. So this is what happens, the greed for power, the greed for money. Instead of the public service that he was shouting at us at that time. You see how money and all of this corrupts and changes individuals because we forget that in everything we do, even though we are not in public service, sabi nga, kahit na nasa bahay lang tayo, ang tulong sa ating kapwa, ang tulong sa mga mahihirap, anong ibig sabihin yan? Higit sa lahat ang tao ang tutulungan. That's exactly what Catholicism is all about. And have we learned this in the 300 years of Spain, of Catholic Spain? Have we learned this in the 200 years thereafter? Have we learned this in all the priests and all the congregations and all of the orders that are now heading universities and colleges? Ano ba ang tinuturo dyan para malaman na talagang ang higit sa lahat ang tao? This is the love that the Pope was talking about. Ngunit kailangan, sapagkat kailangan na ang pagmamahal, sabi nga ng Pope, if you love, then you will give. That is how it goes. It is a consequence of loving. And that's precisely how at this stage. What do you give? You give, like in government, you give good service. As private individuals, we give with compassion to those who are in need and wherever we can give assistance. First of all, our families, family members, our distant relatives and all of this. But in each our respective communities, that is where higit sa lahat ang tao is most important. I have 5 minutes, so maybe I could, the last time I was not able to go into our chat, maybe now I could look into this at this stage, yes. But just to summarize everything that we've been talking about, that is how important this particular program title that we have is today. With the vaccines, with the pandemic, with everything else that is happening, always bear in mind, for all our government officials, for all of those in the health sector, for everybody else that is listening and that would care to perhaps realize that once upon a time, there was this intent that the person should be taken care of, higit sa lahat ang tao. And that's exactly what our program is trying to bring about, and for us to understand, to internalize, and to do some action towards that. So here we are with our chat. Levi Bashel watching. Marcos Avengers. What is this? Levi Bashel, you're watching from Japan. Thank you very much. Arigato gozaimasu. Mart Santos, thank you very much. Watching from Nueva Ecija. You know, sometimes when you go over Facebook posts of people, you could see that they're in the farm, they're doing something for their families, they're harvesting. Mart, ang ganda ng harvest mo ng mga papaya. And then, of course, other things that we can learn. That what else can we do with papaya? Not just achara, but many other things. Yan. Santos Mart. Brenda Zamora watching you, Rita, at Quezon City. Thank you very much. Oh, do be careful. There are so many places there in Quezon City that are now under granular lockdown ang tawag. Reggie Maloloy on may Re, pasensya ka Reggie ha. Ang hirap ko magbasa pagkamalay. Reggie Maloloy on Avenido. Good afternoon po, Madam. Good afternoon sa iyo. Papalo de la Cruz. Keep up the good work, ma'am. Ang good work natin by the word. Remember in Genesis, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Remember, the words that we say and the words that we write create our nation. That is how important the word is. Giorgio Banawi, we need BBM for President, Ma'am Rita. Well, the elections will be 700 days from now. There will be other candidates coming. You have your own choices. You already saw the background of all of these people. You already know the heritage and the ancestry of many of them. Yes, go for those that you feel are most qualified. This is for Jojo Banawi. Yuichi, good evening po, ma'am. I'm your avid listener. Thank you very much. Katipunan channel for everyone. Yes, you should listen to other 3 experts on the topics that I was discussing now. And the oligarchy that they have been talking about. See how important the definition of the oligarchy is. And remember this for the rest of your life because we are under them. Rich people don't feel the pain of being poor. Precisely. But why should there be a pain that only we should suffer? Why should we not let them suffer to the pain of us with our words, if that is the best that we could do at this stage? And that's why I'm talking about it right now. My words, which are coming from 50 years ago, a time that I have experienced, a time that I have seen brought goodness to our people. And a lot of people trying to destroy that regime, trying to destroy and demonize the Marcoses up to this stage when the many things that I am mentioning to you now have already been established, if only they continued with it. Galit na ako, no? Yes. Evelyn Wakatsuki, good evening, ma'am, from Tokyo. Yes, thank you very much. Arigato gozaimasu. RJ Havillana, mabuhay tayo, RJ. Oh my goodness. I really wish I could join you, RJ. And Vivian Velez with you, the muse of our KDP now. I'm glad that she has been part of this now lately. I've called you all patriots. Really, real patriots. Mayet Fuentes. Hi, ma'am. Watching from United Arab Emirates. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Mabuhay kayo. Salamat. Yes, be careful too because this virus spreads and the other viruses other than just this COVID-19. I spoke to you of the virus known as the oligarchic virus. Nelia Tasara, magandang hapon po. Miss Rita, magandang hapon din sa iyo. Rosalinda Cabanilla, Ma'am Rita, magandang hapon po sa inyo. Lagi kong pinapanood lahat ng mga vlogs mo. Very informative. Thank you. Thank you very much that some information you can obtain from my talking. I do this first because the truth must be told. Truth is our refuge and our liberation. So everything that I speak about from the past, I was there, I saw it, I experienced it. And I challenge anybody to question my credentials as far as that is concerned. Francisco Resede, tama po lahat po ng sinasabi po ninyo. Bakit po kaya nawalan ng visa ang pagmumura ni Tatay Digong sa mga oligarko? Oo nga, tanungin nga natin. Ikaw, Francisco, tanungin mo yan. Bakit nawala ng init? We need the fire of Rodrigo Duterte. Sir, Mr. President, you had this in the beginning of your term. We need that fire that you said about the oligarchs, about the water. When you discovered, pinapabayaran tayo ng bilyon-bilyon na kinukubra nila sa isang bagay na hindi pa nila na isasagawa. My goodness, Mr. President, na-discover ninyo yan at nagalit kayo. Ano nangyari? Yung Secretary of Energy, anong ginagawa niya ngayon? Nagkakandagulo siya sa mga kandidato for 2022. Paandarin na yung nuclear plant para yung ating bayad sa kuryente bumaba na. Anyway, Zenea Arcilia, good afternoon, ma'am, watching in Hong Kong. Keep safe po and God bless. Thank you very much. Yes, we do need to keep safe. And that's precisely why over this past several months, we really have to lecture in a way, the way I'm doing, on certain aspects which should be internalized also both by our government, by the president, and by ourselves. Leticia Adyong Kamanse, damage controlling system has to be expounded in the educational system. I hope standardization of education will be moving on the Philippines. For the people in general, more power, ma'am. Yes, standardization in the educational system. Mahalaga po ito na sinasabi mo. You must remember in 1986, pag alis ng mga Marcoses, 96% ang ating literacy. You look at the chart now, my God, nasa dulo tayo ng number 10 as far as even knowing English is concerned. Can you believe that? In 35 years, nabura lahat yan. That is why education is so important. Now, there is an article in the New Yorker, which is my favorite magazine in a way, which talks about the podcasts and all of these laptops and all of these lapdogs, I'm sorry to say, and all of this for the children na hindi nakakatulong talaga sa education nila. Remember, there's a difference between education and instruction. So, we'll discuss that maybe in some other program. Pero mahalaga po yan. And then we have here, Rogelio Tamayaw. Good morning, ma'am. Good morning. Oh, he's watching from Vienna. Guten Morgen. So Vienna, what a beautiful place. Yes. We had the occasion to visit Vienna at one time, all the way up to Salzburg. So I'm glad that you're watching. I hope the winter is not too strong or too wintry for you, because now we're having pockets of this blizzards, winter blizzards in some parts of America. Anyway, thank you for all of those who've come in to chat with us and to send their messages. There are many more, but we don't have time. We're closing. But this is how it is. Sa lahat ng ating kailangan gawin sa buhay, sa ating mga pamahalaan na nagbibigay ng serbisyo sa atin, yung mga oligarko sa ngayon tigilin na yung benepisyo na nanggagaling at the expense of the people. Get into other investments. Be rich. Be very, very rich, but not at the expense of the people. Remember also, ang tulong ang kinakailangan para sa tao. Ang kita, lahat ng inyong hinahawakan, higit sa lahat ang tao ang dapat makinabang. So thank you very much for having joined me. This has been your hour, and this is Rita Gadi.
Ba-ba-da-ba-dum, ba-ba-da-ba-dum, ba-ba-da-ba-da-ba-da-ba-da-ba-dum, bum 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 bum.